So we were having a lot of fun here with the 1862 State of the Union by Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln, of course, was a Kentuckian, born and raised Kentucky, moved to Indiana. His dad owed the neighbor a bunch of fucking money, so Lincoln was used as a little slave boy to go pay off his father's debts in Indiana. And this is where Abraham Lincoln comes to the conclusion, wait a goddamn, this shit's wrong. You're going to use me for slavery to pay your debt? So slavery is wrong. It's a moral wrong. So we should thank Indiana and a shitty father, right, for Abraham Lincoln be the great man that he is. He's one of the few people in history that freed the slaves. Can you name anybody else who freed the slaves? I cannot. Moses, but Moses wasn't real. So can you name anybody that's actually real, right? And it's Moses. It's in the fucking Bible. How did you all read Moses freeing the slaves and misinterpret that one? How'd you get that one wrong there, fucking Baptist, Southern fucking Baptist? So, State of the Union Address, 1862, Abraham Lincoln. The creation of this department was for the more immediate benefit of a large class of our most valuable citizens, and I trust that the liberal basis upon which it has been organized will not only meet your approbation, but that it will realize at no distant day all the fondest anticipations of its most sanguine friends and become the fruitful source of advantage to all our people. This is the Department of Agriculture. Abraham Lincoln, apparently he's claiming that he is the one that instituted the Department of Agriculture. He's the one that printed up the greenback, the U.S. paper money. He's the one that come up with the U.S. greenback. He's the one that had a Homestead Act. He's the one that freed the slaves, right? So goddamn, Lincoln, it's like, slow down a little bit. On the 22nd day of September last, a proclamation was issued by the executive, a copy of which is herewith submitted in accordance with the purpose expressed in the second paragraph of that paper. I now respectfully recall your attention to what may be called compensated emancipation. So he's going to talk about that a little bit. First, the Emancipation Proclamation was issued 10 weeks before he issues the State of the Union. So he puts out his EP, right? OA put out his EP, his Emancipation Proclamation, to stop slavery in the states in rebellion. So Kentucky and Maryland and some other states, there's 3 border states. They all could keep their slaves, but all the slaves that he had no power, all the states that he had no power over, they had to submit to this proclamation. So really it was a toothless thing, except for he said that he can invade Florida because they got slavery now, so he can take all their slaves. So actually, when the Civil War began, I associate myself with the 25,000 black soldiers. So you're slaving on a plantation, this war breaks out, you hear that Abe is going to free the slaves. So a lot of black people got the fuck up out of the plantation, grabbed a gun, and fought for their own damn freedom. And when there's 100,000 Kentuckians that fought in the Civil War, 75,000 for the North and 25,000 for the South. So 25,000 of Kentucky, and 1/4 of all Kentuckians are piece of shit, Confederate low-life motherfuckers. It was brother versus brother. So Kentucky was split apart by a lot of different political reasons, but essentially the northern states are right there at the border, southern states are right there. So it's situated in the fucking middle, right? And so 25,000 piece of shit white motherfuckers were Confederates, but 50,000 were Union, including a shit ton of Germans, and 25 black slaves, former slaves, freed themselves. Hey, there's a war going on to free our state. Give me a fucking gun. And they go to a fort, and it's like, okay, now you got all these black people at the fort. They had no legal recourse, technically speaking, according to Abe. And so by putting this into effect, the Emancipation Proclamation, now he could take the slaves as a war effort. So it took a year, right? It took a whole year before you actually issued it. So the Civil War was to preserve the Union, according to Abraham Lincoln, but he also points out that the main issue at the time was slavery. Also, at this time, a lot of conservative Democrats had won against Abe Lincoln, like in New York and shit, in the House, but a lot of state legislatures, there was a lot of Republicans, so it was kind of mixed. But I think that he's trying to set a moderate tone. That's why he's going to talk about gradual compensated emancipation. So, a nation may be said to consist of its territory, its people, and its laws. The territory is the only part which is of certain durability. One generation passeth away, and another generation cometh, but the earth abideth forever. It is of the first importance to duly consider and estimate this ever-enduring part, that portion of the earth's surface which is owned and inhabited by the people of the United States is well adapted to be the home of one national family, and it is not well adapted for two or more. Its vast extent and its variety of climate and productions are of advantage in this age for one people, whatever they might have been in former ages. Steam, telegraphs, and intelligence have brought these to be an advantageous combination for one united people. In the inaugural address, I briefly pointed out the total inadequacy of disunion as a remedy for the differences between the people of the two sections. I did so in language which I cannot improve, and which therefore I beg to repeat. One section of our country believes slavery is right and ought to be extended, while the other believes it is wrong and ought not to be extended. This is the only substantial dispute. The Fugitive Slave Clause of the Constitution and the law for the suppression of the foreign slave trade are each as well enforced, perhaps, as any law can ever be in a community where the moral sense of the people imperfectly supports the law itself. The great body of the people abide by the dry legal obligation in both cases, and a few break over in each. This, I think, cannot be perfectly cured, and it would be worse in both cases after the separation of the sections than before. The foreign slave trade, now imperfectly suppressed, would be ultimately revived without restriction in one section, while fugitive slaves, now only partially surrendered, would not be surrendered at all by the other. Physically speaking, we cannot separate. We cannot remove our respective sections from each other, nor build an impassable wall between them. A husband and wife may be divorced and go out of the presence and beyond the reach of each other, but the different parts of our country cannot do this. They cannot but remain face-to-face in intercourse, either amicable or hostile, must continue between them. Is it possible, then, to make that intercourse more advantageous or more satisfactory after separation than before? Can aliens make treaties easier than friends can make laws? Can treaties be more faithfully enforced between aliens than laws can among friends? Suppose you go to war. You cannot fight always, and when, after much loss on both sides and no gain on either, you cease fighting, the old identical questions, the old identical old questions as to terms of intercourse are again upon you. There is no line, straight or crooked, suitable for a national boundary upon which to divide. Trace through from east to west upon the line between the free and slave country, and we shall find a little more than 1/3 of its length are rivers, easy to be crossed and populated, or soon to be populated thickly upon both sides, while nearly all its remaining length are merely surveyors' lines over which people may walk back and forth without any consciousness of their presence. No part of this line can be made any more difficult to pass by writing it down on paper or parchment as a national boundary. The fact of separation, if it comes, gives up on the part of the seceding section the Fugitive Slave Clause. Excuse me. The Fugitive Slave Clause, along with all other constitutional obligations upon the section seceded from, which I should expect no treaty stipulation would ever be made to take its place. But there is another difficulty. The great interior region bounded east by the Alleghenies, north by the British Dominions, west by the Alleghenies. I don't know how the fuck it looks like Alleghenies. The fuck's that H doing in there? West by the Rocky Mountains and south by the line along with which the culture of corn and cotton meets, and which includes part of Virginia, part of Tennessee, all of Kentucky, Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, Wisconsin, Illinois, Missouri, Kansas, Iowa, Minnesota, and the territories of Dakota, Nebraska, and part of Colorado already has above 10 million people and will have 50 million within 50 years if not prevented by any political folly or mistake. It contains more than 1/3 of the country owned by the United States, certainly more than 1 million square miles, once half As populous as Massachusetts already is, it would have more than 75 million people. A glance at the map shows that, territorially speaking, it is the great body of the Republic. The other parts are but marginal borders to it. The magnificent region sloping west from the Rocky Mountains to the Pacific being the deepest and also the richest in undeveloped resources in the production of provisions, grains, grasses, and all which proceed from them. This great interior region is naturally one of the most important in the world, ascertained from the statistics. A small proportion of the region which has as yet been brought into cultivation, and also the large and rapidly increasing amount of its products, and we shall be overwhelmed with the magnitude of the prospect presented. And yet this region has no sea coast, touches no ocean anywhere. As part of one nation, its people now find and may forever find their way to Europe by New York, to South America and Africa by New Orleans, and to Asia by San Francisco, but separate our common country into two nations as designed by the present rebellion, and every man of this great interior region is thereby cut off from someone or more of these outlets, not perhaps by a physical barrier, but by embarrassing and onerous trade regulations. And this is true wherever a dividing or boundary line may be fixed. Place it between the now free enslaved country, or place it south of Kentucky or north of Ohio, and still the truth remains that none south of it can trade to any port or place north of it, and none north of it can trade to any port or place south of it, except upon terms dictated by a government foreign to them. These outlets, east, west, and south, are indispensable to the well-being of the people inhabiting, and to inhabit this vast interior region. Which of the three may be the best is no proper question. All are better than either, and all of right belong to that people and to their successors forever. True to themselves, they will not ask where a line of separation shall be, but will vow rather that there shall be no such line. Nor are there marginal regions less interested in these communications to and through them to the great outside world. They too, and each of them, must have access to this Egypt of the West without paying toll at the crossing of any national boundary. Our national strife springs not from our permanent part, not from the land we inhabit, and not from our national homestead. There's no possible severing of this, but would multiply and not mitigate evils among us. In all its adaptations and aptitudes, it demands union and abhors separation. In fact, it would ere long force reunion, however much of blood and treasure the separation might have cost. Our strife pertains to ourselves, to the passing generations of men, and it cannot without convulsion be hushed forever with the passing of one generation. In this view, I recommend the adoption of the following resolution and articles amendatory to the Constitution of the United States, resolved by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America and Congress assembled, 2/3 of both houses concurring, that the following articles be proposed to the legislatures or conventions of the several states as amendments to the Constitution of the United States, all or any of which articles, when ratified by 3/4 of the said legislatures or conventions, to be valid as part or parts of the said Constitution. Viz. Article. Every state wherein slavery now exists, which shall abolish the same therein at any time or times before the 1st of January A.D. 1900, shall receive compensation from the United States as follows. To wit, the President of the United States shall deliver to each state bonds of the United States bearing interest at the rate of % per annum, to an amount equal to the aggregate sum of blank for each slave shown to have been therein by the 8th census of the United States. Said bonds to be delivered to such state by installments or in one parcel at the completion of the abolishment, accordingly as the same shall have been gradual or at one time within such state, and interest shall begin to run upon any such bond only from the proper time of its delivery as aforesaid. Any state having received bonds as aforesaid and afterwards reintroducing or tolerating slavery therein shall refund to the United States the bonds so received or the value thereof and all interest paid thereon. All slaves who shall have enjoyed actual freedom by the chances of the war at any time before the end of the rebellion shall be forever free, but all owners of such who shall not have been disloyal shall be compensated for them at the same rates as is provided for states adopting abolishment of slavery, but in such a way that no slave shall be twice accounted for. So for the states of Maryland and Kentucky and the other one, I think Missouri, maybe, I don't know. Definitely Kentucky and Maryland, border states, Union states that had slaves. So they are saying that they will, their slaves, they will buy them. They will get bought out. So there'll be a big buyout. Congress may appropriate money and otherwise provide for colonizing free colored persons with their own consent at any place or places without the United States. I beg indulgence to discuss these proposed articles at some length. Without slavery, the rebellion could never have existed. Without slavery, it could not continue. Among the friends of the Union, there is great diversity of sentiment and of policy in regard to slavery and the African race amongst us. Some would perpetuate slavery, some would abolish it suddenly without compensation, some would abolish it gradually and with compensation. Some would remove the freed people from us, and some would retain them with us, and there are yet many other minor diversities. Because of these diversities, we waste much strength in struggles among ourselves. By mutual concession, we should harmonize and act together. This would be compromise, but it would be compromise among the friends and not with the enemies of the Union. These articles are intended to embody a plan of such mutual concessions. If the plan shall be adopted, it is assumed that emancipation will follow, at least in several of the states. As to the first article, the main points are, first, the emancipation; secondly, the length of time for consummating it, 37 years; and thirdly, the compensation. The emancipation will be unsatisfactory to the advocates of perpetual slavery, but the length of time should greatly mitigate their dissatisfaction. The time spares both races from the evils of sudden derangement, in fact, from the necessity of any derangement, while most of those whose habitual course of thought will be disturbed by the measure will have passed away before its consummation. They will never see it. Another class will hail the prospect of emancipation, but will deprecate the length of time. They will feel that it gives too little to the now living slaves, but it really gives them much. It saves them from the vagrant destitution, which must largely attend immediate emancipation in localities where the numbers are very great, and it gives the inspiring assurance that their posterity shall be free forever. The plan leaves to each state choosing to act under it to abolish slavery now, or at the end of the century, or at any intermediate time, or by degrees extended over the whole or any part of the period, and it obliges no two states to proceed alike. It also provides for compensation and generally the mode of making it. This, it would seem, must further mitigate the dissatisfaction of those who favor perpetual slavery, especially of those who are to receive the compensation. Doubtless, some of those who are to pay and not to receive will object, yet the measure is both just and economical. In a certain sense, the liberation of slaves is the destruction of property acquired by descent or by purchase, the same as any other property. It is no less true, for having been often said that the people of the South are not more responsible for the original introduction of this property than are the people of the North. And when it is remembered how unhesitatingly we all use cotton and sugar and share the profits of dealing in them, it may not be quite safe to say that the South has been more responsible than the North for its continuance. If, then, for a common object this property is to be sacrificed, is it not just that it be done at a common charge? And with less money, or money more easily paid, we can preserve the benefits of the Union by this means than we can by the war alone. Is it not also economical to do it? Let us consider it then. Let us ascertain the sum we have extended in the war since compensated emancipation was proposed last March, and consider whether, if that measure had been promptly accepted by even some of the slave states, the same sum would not have done more to close the war than has been otherwise done. If so, the measure would save money, and in that view would be a prudent and economical measure. Certainly, it is not so easy to pay something as it is to pay nothing, but it is easier to pay a large sum than it is to pay a larger one, and it is easier to pay any sum when we are able than it is to pay it before we are able. The war requires large sums and requires them at once. The aggregate sum necessary for compensated emancipation, of course, would be large, but it would require no ready cash, nor the bonds even any faster than the emancipation progresses. This might not, and probably would not, close before the end of the 37 years. At that time, we shall probably have 100 millions of people to share the burden instead of 31 millions as now. And not only so, but the increase of our population may be expected to continue for a long time after that period as rapidly as before, because our territory will not have become full. I do not state this inconsiderately. At the same ratio of increase which we have maintained on an average from our first national census in 1790 until that of 1860, we should in 1900 have a population of 103 million. And why may we not continue that ratio far beyond that period? Our abundant room, our broad national homestead is our ample resource. Were our territory as limited as are the British Isles, very certainly our population cannot expand as stated. Instead of receiving the foreign-born as now, we should be compelled to send part of the native-born away. But such is not our condition. We have 2.963 million square miles. Europe has 3.8 million square miles, with a population averaging 73 1/3 persons to the square mile. Why may not our country at the same time average as many? Is it less fertile? Has it more waste surface by mountains, rivers, lakes, deserts, or other causes? Is it inferior to Europe in any natural advantage? If then we are at some time to be as populous as Europe, how soon? As to when this may be, we can judge by the past and the present. As to when it will be, if ever, depends much on whether we maintain the Union. Several of our states are already above the average of Europe, 73 1/3 to the square mile. Massachusetts has 157, Rhode Island 133, Connecticut 99, New York and New Jersey each 80. Also, two other great states, Pennsylvania and Ohio, are not far behind, the former having 63 and the latter 59. The states already above the European average, except New York, have increased in as rapid a ratio. Of increase for the several decennial periods as to be as follows. Then there's 1790, 3.9 million, 1800, 5.3 million, 1810, 7.3 million, 1820, 9.3 million, 1830, 12.8 million, 1840, 17 million, 1815, 1850, 23 million, 1860, 31 million. This shows an average decennial increase of 34.60% in population through the 70 years from our first to our last census. Our last census yet taken, it is seen that the ratio of increase at no one of these 7 periods is either 2% below or 2% above the average, thus showing how inflexible and consequently how reliable the law of increase in our case is. Assuming that it will continue, it gives the following results: 1870, 43 million, 1880, 57 million, 1890, 77 million, 1900, 103 million, 1910, 139 million, 1920, 187 million, 1930, 252 million. These figures show that our country may be as populous as Europe now is at some point between 1920 and 1930. Say about 1925, our territory at 73 1/3 persons to the square mile being of capacity to contain 217 million. And we will reach this, too, if we do not ourselves relinquish the chance by the folly and evils of disunion, or by long and exhausting war springing from the only great element of national discord among us. While it cannot be foreseen exactly how much one huge example of secession breeding lesser ones indefinitely would retard population, civilization, and prosperity, no one can doubt that the extent of it would be very great and injurious. The proposed emancipation would shorten the war, perpetuate peace, ensure this increase of population, and proportionally the wealth of the country. With these, we should pay all the emancipation would cost, together with our other debt, easier than we should pay our other debt without it. If we had allowed our old national debt to run at 6% per annum, simple interest from the end of our revolutionary struggle until today, without paying anything on either principal or interest, each man of us would owe less upon that debt now than each man owed upon it then. And this because our increase of men through the whole period has been greater than 6%, has run faster than the interest upon the debt. Thus, time alone relieves a debtor nation, so long as its population increases faster than unpaid interest accumulates on its debt. This fact would be no excuse for delaying payment of what is justly due, but it shows the great importance of time in this connection, the great advantage of a policy by which we shall not have to pay until we number 100 million what by a different policy we would have to pay now when we number but 31 million. In a word, it shows that $1 will be much harder to pay for the war than will be $1 for emancipation on the proposed plan. And then the latter will cost no blood, no precious life. It will be saving both. As to the second article, I think it would be impracticable to